Welcome to today's webinar. We are so excited to have Ali Lipshin here to be able to share her great content with us on foundations for student learning, building blocks for effective academic instruction. My name is Patricia Wright and I work with Rethink. Before we get started, I'd like to take a moment to explain just a couple of things about the webinar. During the webinar, you can hear us, but we cannot hear you. So if you have questions, please type them into the question box on your control panel. I'll do my best to answer those questions throughout by responding back to you, and then we'll field as many questions as we have time for with our hosts at the end of the session. As I shared, we have an incredible invited presenter today, Allison Moores-Lipshin. Allison is a board-certified behavior analyst with a master's degree in educational psychology and a bachelor's degree in elementary education. She's currently the director of specialized learning for the Academy of Precision Learning, a private school in Seattle that specializes in inclusion of kids with and without learning disabilities and autism. Ali is the program architect and educational founder for this school, which is currently celebrating its 10th anniversary. Throughout her 20-year career, Allison has been a passionate and dedicated teacher, behavior analyst, and educational consultant for students, their families, and educators. And now I speak for all of us in attendance that we so look forward to learning from you today, Ali. Take it away.
All right, thank you so much, Patricia, and thank you for inviting me to do this presentation. So I'm just going to jump right in here. So when we talk about building blocks and foundations for education and for implementation, I want to kind of clear up some terminology. So I like to call it component composite analysis. So when I look at a student and I'm trying to identify where to start, or if the student kind of already has some skills but are missing some pre-skills, and I just want to look and do an overall analysis on the student's abilities, I talk about using a component composite analysis. So some terminology related to that. So components, if you think about parts or elements or the tools necessary for which a kid needs to draw from in order to complete a larger skill set or even a small task, we're talking about linking skills together and the building blocks for higher level thinking or skills. And if students are fluent or have mastered those component skills, and we'll talk a little bit later about what I consider some of the hallmark component skills, we look at combining those skills together to make larger repertoires or composites. So we're talking about a part to whole, where the whole is usually what you're looking at as a deficit area in the student or something that the student hasn't quite learned yet. You're looking at compounding skills together, again, repertoires and chains. And in my world, I always talk about, it doesn't matter, we're very skilled in the behavior analysis world and special education, general education. Millions of kids around the world are learning things every single day very, very well and to mastery level criterion. However, if you don't look at the composite of the real world application of that skill, my contention is you're kind of wasting the kids' time and your time. So it's great if you can teach them rocket science to a 3-year-old, and if that 3-year-old can learn it, more power to them. But what's the real world application, and what's the biggest bang for your buck at teaching that skill at 3 or 4 or 5 or 35? So I always look at making sure that I'm attending to the real world application of whatever component or composite skill that's being targeted in the student's learning plan. So what I like to do, and what I try to stress with my educational staff, is to look for those key component skills. Now, if you have a good curricular sequence, either homemade or you've purchased published curricula, if there's a good curricular sequence, those sequences will focus on component skills that are widely needed in many composite skills. So, when I look at, in the autism field, when I look at an assessment tool such as an assessment for basic language and learning skills or an assessment for functional learning skills or living skills, I don't want to teach every single activity to every single criterion level and every single goal and objective. That would take a lifetime. But what I want to do is I want to look for those individual either tool skills, component skills, or individual composite skills that if that student learns those skills to fluency, you get a bang for your buck. You get the biggest bang for your buck. So if they learn how to count, look at all of these composite skills related to math that you can basically get for free because you taught them fluently that tool skill of counting, or number recognition, or phoneme recognition, or segmenting and blending and reading. So in 2001, the National Research Council published, to me, a pivotal landmark. Um, it's in a book form at this point, Lord and McGee, of what quality program for students with autism should look like. And why it was landmark, at least in my world, was because a variety of my behavior analytic professionals were only focusing on the first three. And then at some point we're looking at play as an early intervention, and then social interaction as the student engaged further with students according to play, or got older and it looked like less play and more social interaction. We as a field would leave communication up to the speech language pathologists, and we would leave motor skills up to the occupational therapist. Every once in a while, if a kid got old enough, we would start looking at self-help skills. But what I like is that what these very smart people identified was that all quality programming, regardless of age or ability, or disability or non-disability, should include all of these activities. So what I want to do is kind of break those down a little bit into looking at composites for those larger repertoire composite areas. So if we took math, and 2 + 2 = 4 is a Common Core standard on the kindergarten strands, where it looks, for educators, or at least elementary educators, as a bottom basement tool skill. And yes, you need to know that 2 + 2 = 4 in order to do higher level math as a middle school, high school student. However, if you're a kindergartner, first grader, second grader, or eighth grader, 2 + 2 = 4, if that's hard for you and you're not mastering that to the level that you can then use that as a tool skill for higher math, what I look at is, okay, well, why is 2 + 2 = 4 a composite skill? What are the component skills related to that for a student? So obviously on the left-hand side here, we have what is included as a tool skill for the math operations. On the right-hand side, we have tool skills for the actual written output. If this, in fact, in traditional math programming, usually looks like some sort of a worksheet or some kind of a written output in order to prove to the teacher that you know how to do 1 + 1 digit addition, digits 10 or less. I believe that's the kindergarten strand. So one-to-one correspondence, we can work on that and then get 2 + 2 = 4. We have to have rote counting, both forwards and backwards. And one of the things, I'll get on a little soapboxes throughout our presentation here. And one of the soapboxes I get on is I don't teach, at least students with significant developmental delays or learning disabilities, I don't teach forward counting without backward counting. So to me, a lot of math curricula will focus on the addition. I throw subtraction in right away because most students, if they master addition, you're assuming that they're going to understand that subtraction is just the opposite of that. But for my little guys, sometimes the act of rote counting needs to be mastered in forward and backward, because counting doesn't mean only going forward. So I also look at number recognition, expressive and receptive number recognition. So if you're asking a student to answer a question in class when the teacher says, hey, what's 2 + 2? That's an expressive language expectation for that student. And receptively, again, if the student doesn't understand what a 2 is receptively in relation to correspondence and rote counting, they're not going to be able to do this skill. So a lot of times I get students with autism or students with significant delays who the parents are saying, or or educators will say, well, they have a math disability or a reading disability. And a lot of times the disability is showing up in a math or a reading class, but it could be something as simple as they just have a hard time writing. And that's where my OT friends come in. So how is their pencil grip? It doesn't have to be perfect. Oops. It doesn't have to be perfect for them to write the number 4, but it also can't be painful if you want them to do an entire worksheet of addition facts. can they make marks with enough intensity for the teacher after school to then grade their math paper? So if they're writing so lightly that the teacher can't see what number it is, it looks like a math problem. And then do these marks combine correctly to form numbers? So again, the foundation skills for cognitive academic, which is a number of focus areas for educators and behavior analysts and parents and interventionists in general, I contend that the simple learning skills and what we consider preschool or pre-learning skills of imitation, matching, receptive, and expressive identification are hallmark foundational base tool skills for cognitive and academic. And when I say that, imitation, if you watch a highly qualified educator or interventionist expecting their student to make progress, and that student is making progress, a lot of the error corrections that that interventionist is using require that student to have a solid imitative repertoire. So if the student is looking at the board and the teacher has 2 plus 2 up on the board and the student answers 5, the teacher may do some sort of a mini lesson or an error correction, and they may write the number 4 on the board to say, look, we just had this little lesson, it produced the right answer of 4. Well, if that student can't imitate, that student's not going to look at 2 plus 2 the next time and remember or imitate 4. And again, matching. If the student can't match 4 items with the number 4 on a flashcard, and that's one-to-one correspondence and receptive identification, they're not going to be able to use that as a skill set with which to learn new activities. These next couple of slides are just illustrations as far as how scope and sequencing component composite analysis looks like in kind of a one-pager. When I was in a private practice in the Seattle area for Breezy & Morse Consulting, we primarily worked with students on the autism spectrum, and primarily in a traditional ABA format, such as a home program or in a self-contained classroom where there's one teacher and one student. And so throughout our 10-year history of working in this format, we were able to collect a lot of really great data as far as what entering repertoire students have, what holes traditionally students have in those entering repertoires, and how can we scope and sequence across certain language repertoires. So this right here is what you see as our scope and sequence for imitation. And what you see on the bottom is gross motor imitation. And I'll tell you a little bit later that I actually had many students who come to me who can't even do this bottom tool skill of gross motor imitation. So we break this down even further below this. But once you have gross motor imitation, then you can start moving up these chains and up these levels to get all the way up to repeating sentences and words. And then this kicks into our expressive language scope and sequence. So again, here's gross motor imitation as the key skill and the key component skill, and here are some composites that come out of gross motor imitation. This is our expressive language repertoire. So remember, I said it starts with gross motor imitation and then it moves up the chain, and then once you move into hearsay is just basically, I'm a precision teacher, and in the precision teaching language, hearsay is what we call a channel set. So the student will hear something and then say something back related to that. So once at the end of this imitation sequence, we have a student imitating expressive language components. Whoops. Now we come down here, and these expressive language components become the component skills for the composites of talking and more abstract language. So back to our foundation skills. Again, we just talked really briefly about cognitive academic. Now, self-help and motor skills. We like to leave this to the occupational therapists as the related service who have the expertise in occupational therapy and how to intervene with self-help and motor skills. I have no problem working with highly skilled occupational therapists, and I've learned a lot over the years from some of my friends who have given me a lot of information about tool skills related to self-help and motor skills. One of the things that has developed within the precision teaching community for generations, but then also within my scope of practice, is what we consider these called Big 6 plus 6 tool skills. So basically, these are independent gross motor and fine motor activities, mostly fine motor, but they move into gross motor composites, And we specifically pinpoint these motor activities to make the muscles and motor control strong enough for them to do composite skills. So think about it, reach. If you want a student to look at a field of, let's say, 15 flashcards on the desk in front of them, and then you're doing a receptive identification program, I don't know, say it's colors, and you say touch red, touch blue, touch orange, and the student is right-handed, but the orange card is in the top left, they have to reach across midline in order to do that. If we have students who cannot reach because they can't lift their arm up enough in order to contact what they're reaching for, similar to this little cartoon here, they have to be taught how to use their muscles in order to reach. Again, pointing. A number of students, will not progress in receptive identification because they use a whole hand with which to place on the color card in the field of 15 in front of them. Well, some kids' hands, if they place it on the orange, it's covering the blue and the red as well because their fingers are splayed open. So we teach pointing. And I'll bring up, typical development here. And I use my daughters. I have a 3.5-year-old and an 18-month-old. And I see, so far neurotypical development in them. And I see what the speech pathologists and what the early interventionists call joint attention. And I don't have to teach my infant or my 18-month-old how to point. They instinctively know how to do that. Now, their fine motor control may not look like a pointer finger with these 3 fingers down and knowing what to do with their thumb, but they can get that pointer finger out and start directing my attention using it. Many students on the spectrum, at least, don't have the fine motor control to keep those 3 fingers down and know what to do with their thumb. So when you ask them to point, they don't know how to do it from a musculature standpoint. Scissors, that's a grasp and release. This right here is a pencil point and a good pencil grasp. That's a pinch. I need to pinch at the bottom here. I need to pick it up. I need to place it in my hands, and then I need to apply enough pressure to make a mark. Push and pull, we have squeezing, we have pinching again, like with the muscle, turning a doorknob. Now, many doorknobs these days are the handicapped accessible. I believe they're for handicapped accessible, the lever kind, but the student still needs to place their hand on the top and push down. In these doorknobs, the student needs to squeeze and then turn or twist. And then Legos, again, I look at tool skills, big 6 plus 6, as self-help and motor skills, but also play skills and engagement skills, because if all the other 8-year-olds in that 2nd or 3rd grade classroom are playing Legos and my student can't pinch the Lego to pick it up and place it, they're not going to be able to engage in that activity. So fine muscle control is a component skill for self-help skills. Again, we have a student here who is trying to put on his coat, and putting on coats or backpacks or self-help skills as such are in very many IEP goals and very many treatment plan goals across the field. And a lot of times just saying put on your coat is not enough. You need to teach the kids the motor skills to reach, to grasp, to pull, and to place. So again, with academics, handwriting and typing, those are all motor skills. Reading, I have a number of students that have tracking problems. They can't point, and they don't have one-to-one correspondence from a left to right reach perspectives in order to track across the page. And again, math, there's a lot of high-level, highly reviewed, published math curricula that for the first 2 to 3 grade levels, K through 2 or K through 3, the students use manipulatives to learn math concepts. Well, again, as an example with the Legos, what if the kid can't pick up the disc that they're supposed to be placing on the scale to experience measurement? And again, like I said, toy interaction and social interaction. So toy manipulation and game playing. Again, you see somebody here playing chess, they have to pinch, pick up, reach, and place. Those are all motor skills. And then they also actually have to know how to play chess, which I do not. So going back to, again, foundation skills. If you're taking your cognitive academic skills, your self-help motor skills with those components of fine motor and gross motor control. Now you're looking at engagement and social interaction and play in totally different, from a totally different perspective. Yes, they need to have what a lot of interventionists call social skills, but social skills require many other composite skills for them to draw on, for which then they need to be social. So again, if you have teenagers or young adults playing video games, there's a lot of fine motor control with those game controllers and hand-eye coordination and big six skills that are just not present in some of our students without direct intervention. So remember I was saying back in the scope and sequence, I'll go back and I'll show you, with gross motor skills on the bottom as a component skill for imitation, there's those kids that don't get the memo that they need to have gross motor skills. Let me go back and find my slide here. So attending skills. Sometimes we have to back way up to looking at what is an attending skill. Now, in the behavior analytic field, when we talk about behavior and about pinpointing behavior for treatment plan goals or IEP objectives, we talk about behaviors that you can observe. And so there's a common saying, you know, if a dead man can do it, it's not behavior. So if you prop a skeleton up on a chair, he can look like he's paying attention. He can look like he's listening. He can look like he's watching television. He's watching the teacher. He can look like he's sitting appropriately. But it's not a behavior because he's actually not a behaving individual. So I look at attending skills and I see a number of students and I say, wow, they just don't have attending skills. But it's hard to pinpoint what is an attending skill for which to write an IEP goal or objective. So if you look in the speech and language literature, they talk about attending as the ability to interpret and prioritize multiple and simultaneous stimuli. So what that looks like is the student with autism sitting in a classroom and is so distracted by the train that just went by because the windows are open that they can't listen to the teacher at the same time. Or the student with attention deficit hyperactivity disorder that cannot focus on the teacher because there's a big black fly flying around the room and they cannot discriminate foreground background noise in order to tune out the fly and look at the teacher and pay attention and interpret what the teacher is doing. Attending skills are also the ability to shift attention from preferred, non-preferred stimuli, an example of a puzzle if that is a preferred stimuli, to a math paper or a non-preferred stimuli. So a number of times I get called into either local school districts or other private schools in the area to look at kids' behaviors. I need a functional behavior assessment. This kid tantrums every time he goes to math class. He hates math. He's terrible in math. What do we do about math? And I'll say, oh, well, let me look at their math scores. And I'll say, wow, you know, any assessment, either curriculum-based or normative, that any educator has done or any behavior analyst has completed really doesn't show a math deficits. There don't really seem to be holes in their math skills. So then I'll say, well, what happens right prior to math class? Like, why is the kid always really upset when they walk into math class? And the teacher will say, oh, it's recess. And I'll say, oh, well, is recess a preferred activity or a preferred time of day for the student? They say, yes, it's their favorite activity or their favorite class of the day. And I'll say, oh, well, the problem isn't really math. You could put any subject after recess, and the kid is probably not able to shift their attention from a highly stimulating, highly preferred activity, which to the student is recess, to a most likely less preferred activity, which could be anything sitting in a chair and not outside. So I will engage in a behavior intervention plan for the transition, not for the math class. So again, attending skills is the ability to shift attention across topographies and amongst variable stimuli. So for example, if a student is reading silently and listening to teacher's directions, or if I see my activity right here where I have a teacher sitting at a small group table and I have multiple students here and I have one student in the middle who may or may not be paying attention. And I look at this and say, okay, well, other students seem like they've started the activity. The teacher seems like they're directing their attention at this student here who doesn't look to be starting the activity. And I look and say, wow, there's a lot of really colorful boxes that my student in the purple shirt here might be looking at different ways to play with in a preferred or non-preferred way for the teacher. I see that the teacher is shuffling through papers, and that may or may not be related to the activity. I see another kid talking to the teacher, and then I see my student right here just not really able to engage because of all the multiple stimuli. And this student is probably thinking, what am I supposed to attend to? The purple box that I really want to take outside with recess to recess with me. I really like the smell of these markers. This friend here is talking about his recess time, and the teacher is shuffling their papers. So this could be an attending skills problem, not a learning skills or student behavior problem. So how do you teach students to attend when it doesn't look like an overt behavior? Well, one of the things I try to do is just operationalize. If a student is attending, therefore they will do this behavior. The best way to look at that and intervene with that is to set up what I call anticipatory games. So if you set up patterns with short, discrete, and enjoyable movements, motions, or sounds, what you want to do is create a short pattern, and usually it's some sort of a fine motor task or an enjoyable large motor task. Social interaction tasks are the best. What you want to do is take data on the number of instances that the child anticipates the next step in the sequence. So I had a student who was 2.5 when we started intervention with him, and he's actually now 17.5 and still in my school. And when we started intervention with him, he was one of the absolute trickiest kids I'd ever started with. He had zero interaction with the outside world. He had no vocal verbal output. He had no eye contact, joint attention, or any awareness that there were living, breathing human beings around him. He's in a family of 6, 4 boys and 2 parents, and he didn't even move out of the way if somebody was walking down the hallway of his home. If you dropped a stack of large textbooks behind him, he didn't even have a startle response to turn around and see what that noise was. So this student had significant attending problems to life, let alone to any kind of instruction. We could not get gross motor imitation with him after 8 months of trying. We tried everything, and I have data to support 0 mastered skills in 8 months, and it was getting a little embarrassing after about month 2 or 3. So what I looked at was, okay, I need to engage the student with me for instruction. And one of the ways I can do that is to set up these little games. So he was young, he was 2.5 to 3 at this point, and I would pick him up, put him on a table, and let him jump off the table. And this was an absolute preferred activity for him during his downtime. So I have him on the floor, pick him up, set him on the table, let him jump down. Pick him up, set him on the table, let him jump down. After a while, I would wait a couple of seconds before the next step in that sequence to see if he would engage in any kind of anticipation that that next step was coming. So if he was on the floor, did he look up at me? Did he raise his hands? Did he go up on his tiptoes because he was anticipating getting on the table? Once he was on the table, did he fall forward in order to jump off the table? Did he look at me with a smile because that was his favorite part, was jumping off of high structures? Did he reach for me because he liked it when I caught him on his way down? So I would take data on the number of instances that he anticipated the next step. And then I would take data on the amount of those anticipations that were actually joint attention. So it's great that he anticipated the falling, but he could fall with or without me in the room. Did he make eye contact with me while he was anticipating the next step? Did he reach out for me while he was anticipating that next step and then smile with me while we were having fun playing this game? And then you just start making the games more sophisticated and more steps than just 3 steps. So here's a sample scope and sequence for this particular student, preschool student that I was talking about. So the next thing we did after the jump off the table was imitate song movements in context. Now he was attending an inclusion-based preschool, so he was doing the circle time 3 times a day, and they had the same songs in their circle repertoire: Wheels on the Bus, We All Get Together. I'm trying to think of them off the top of my head. We have the Days of the Week song, all these songs. And they all had arm and body movements with them. So we would sing the songs with the song movements in context. And it was great because this particular preschool actually they burned a disc, a CD for us to send the music home so that the exact song that he was practicing and playing in class was the one that we were doing during our intervention time at home. So we would imitate the song movements for Wheels on the Bus. They go round and round, the doors open, the windshield wipers wipe, all the wheels on the bus. We would do that over and over and over until the student would start anticipating the next part of the song. Then what we would do out of context, meaning without the CD, and let's just say we're on a break and we're playing with the bean bags, and then I all of a sudden say, the wheels on the bus go round and round, and as soon as that student hears the start of that song, do they engage in that movement out of context? Or I won't even start with the beginning of the song. I'll start with the end of the song with the baby saying wah, 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 totally out of context. Do they stop what they're doing and engage in the movement? Then we imitate actions with auditory feedback. So this particular student, if I put a pencil in a cup, or if I put a Lego block on top of another Lego block, or a Duplo block because he was young, that student would hit or miss imitate me. And what I would notice when I was doing evaluations with the other staff members on the team, I would notice that the only items that the student would the only items that the student would imitate were when the interventionist actually did what the toy is supposed to do. So if I picked up a tambourine and banged on it, he would pick up the tambourine and bang on it. But if I picked the tambourine up and put it on my head, he would pick the tambourine up and bang on it. So he was doing what the toy did, not what the person operating the toy did. So what we ended up doing then was imitating actions with auditory feedback so that he would imitate the auditory. So I would take the Duplo block and hit it up against the wall, and he would imitate hitting it up against the wall because that sounded different than hitting it on the table. Then we would do imitate actions with toys, and then finally we got gross motor, fine motor, and we could kick into that scope and sequence where that was a tool skill for everything that came above it. So at the end of my foundation skill list here, we have social interaction, play, and communication, and I want to spend a lot of time on a soapbox here, and I'm warning you that this is a soapbox because what I look for in a lot of very high quality, well-meaning interventionists, either teachers, parents, or related service personnel, is they look at social interaction, play, and communication by just the composite output skills. So they're looking at play volleys with a preschooler at recess, or they're looking at conversation volleys with a middle schooler during a social skills group. Or with play, they're looking at the number of times the student engages in the playground during the tag game, or the number of times the student will engage in a video game as turn taking with their partner. And then again, communication on top of all of that is a social interaction. So what I look at is, a number of students with autism, especially the older they get, the further from the norm they get from their peers. So if I have a student who likes to kick a soccer ball, that's great when they're 5 and 6 years old because all their friends are running around just kicking soccer balls. And we can work on the motor movements for that, and they're enjoying it with their friends. However, once that student gets into upper elementary or middle school, the kids are now on soccer leagues actually playing a controlled game. And my student is still just kicking the soccer ball on the side of the field. So what I want to talk about is pragmatic language skills. I want to talk about what independent component skills are necessary to look at composite skills that require those components. So if you look at the definition of pragmatic language on the ASHA website, American Speech and Hearing Association, basically the definition is social language use, which is a little less than helpful. It is true, and it's absolutely what the speech languages look at when they talk about pragmatic language, but social language use isn't helpful when you're looking at breaking down component skills for which the composite of social language use is helpful. So there's a speech language pathologist here in the greater Seattle area, and I've been working with her for about 20 years for a variety of clients. She's in private practice, and we started noticing early on with our shared clients that we would have huge repertoires of component skills and receptive and expressive language, and we could get some scripted social interaction, but we weren't getting novel or natural or instinctual social interaction. So we started looking at some, published assessments in the speech and language world, specifically the test of pragmatic language and the test of problem solving. And those were very helpful to us because we started giving them to general ed neurotypical siblings as well as the siblings in our study groups. And we were starting to notice patterns in errors. And most of our students who were getting through, the early intervention, and they were now 6, 7, 8, 9 years old, they looked pretty good on criterion assessments such as the ABLS, the Assessment for Basic Language and Learning Skills. They were okay in class, but they just weren't making friends. And they were getting themselves in trouble on the playground, and all these behavior problems were coming out, it relating to social interaction, at least during social interaction times. And they were just, becoming the class bully, or they were too bossy. They just didn't know how to relate to same age peers. And so what the speech pathologist and my colleagues and I did was we started lining up these tests of pragmatic language scores. And we started looking at where kids were falling apart. Most of those kids that had solid intervention were coming up between the 3 to 5 year age equivalent from on the test of pragmatic language. And when you're 9 years old and you're really functioning between a 3 to 5 year age range, that can cause some problems on the playground. So we started looking at what were the individual skills that were being assessed and how were our students falling behind. We were also looking at academic skill deficits alongside of this. So predominantly what the parents and professionals were looking at were labeling social skills deficits. And then we started noticing, well, these social skills deficits, actually the component skills for pragmatic language are also required in composite skills for some academics. So here we have what we identified as being the underlying pragmatic component skills. So these are skills that we directly intervene and directly teach across a variety of scope and sequences in order to make sure that we're sampling the resultant composite academic and social skills. So when I say emotions here, and I'm not going to go into all of them because this actually is a 6-hour workshop that we've done, I just want to make sure that you leave this talk with a little bit of a piqued interest on this, and you understand a little bit about what we're talking about with these words. Emotions is not, to me, teaching emotions is not the flashcards you get at Lakeshore Learning that have the same kid in the same blue shirt making his face look different ways. That's a way to teach the vocabulary word of frustrated or confused or happy, sad, excited, angry. That's fine because you got to teach those vocabulary words, but that is not teaching emotions. We're talking about a labeling of a feeling within the context that produced that emotion. So if I'm frustrated right now, it's because something is happening in my world that is frustrating me, and this feeling I have inside is labeled frustration. Those are the emotions we're talking about. Then sequencing and predicting. It's really hard to follow a conversation about Pokemon if I don't have, I could know everything I possibly can about Pokemon, all the characters, all the points, how to play the game, what the cards and the colors and the shapes and the sizes. But if I can't predict where this conversation is going with my friend, I may just be stuck on rote talking about my Pokemon characters. And also sequencing goes into this effect as well. And I'll get into a little bit on how sequencing and predicting are very much prevalent in academic skills, especially reading comprehension. Cause and effect, identifying problems and formulating solutions. Perspective taking. If your student does not have perspective taking in navigating their social arena, like if I push my friend off the swing because I need to be on the swing and that kid's been on there too long and I don't understand why my friend is now crying, that's a perspective taking problem. But that student is also not going to be able to understand author's purpose and character, voice, and development in novels for reading comprehension. Reading of non-vocal cues and attending to environmental cues. I always use the examples of me traveling in developing countries or non-English speaking countries or non-Western cultural countries. So I've been very honored and privileged in my work in the past 20+ years to do have some opportunities to work in developing countries. And those developing countries in Africa, Sri Lanka, I've worked in American Samoa, or even those in American territory, they have a completely different cultural set of identities and mores than what we do on the mainland in the United States. So my goal is not to go to these countries that I'm invited to and completely piss off the rest of the country. That is absolutely 100% not my goal, to be the ugly American in a foreign country, especially when I'm invited there. But I'm there for a week, maybe two at tops, and there's not a lot that I can do to prepare other than ask my hosts, you know, making sure that I'm dressing appropriately and making sure that I have the appropriate you know, words or sayings. But still, while I'm there, interacting with hotel personnel or interacting with taxi drivers, even the ticket counter at the airport, there's a lot of just non-vocal and environmental cues that I have to attend to, and especially if it's a non-English first speaking country. If they're speaking broken English and I can't speak their native language, there's a lot of non-vocal cues and environmental cues that both of us have to engage in order to get our points across. So moving on, we have multiple meanings of words. So this is idioms and antonyms, synonyms, those types of things. Part to whole and conversation in and of itself is a pragmatic component. So if you look at taking those pragmatic component skills and applying them to the first composite area, which is social skills application, these are color coded for a reason, because I want you to see the color coding with respect to the composite skill. So the component skill of conversation. So in order to be a good conversationalist, or at least pass as an average conversationalist, you need to understand initiation and termination statements. How do I start a conversation, and how do I graciously leave a conversation? That's a skill set. Conversation volleys. In order for me to go back and forth in a volley, and a volley in my world is person A says something, person B responds, person B then shoots it back to person A on topic. So it's not a question answer. It's a question answer volley back. That's a single volley. So in order to have conversation volleys, you also have to have perspective taken. In order to have conversation volleys, you also have to have prediction. You also have to understand nonverbal cues, because if I just said something to you that was offensive and you say something back to me with your facial expression and your body language being offended, what I should volley back to you is some sort of a reparative strategy or an apology at the least. So again, repair strategies falls under conversation, but also you need nonverbal cues to understand that, oh, I did something, I probably need to repair it. Perspective taking, again, if you don't have perspective taking of your conversation or your social skills partner, you're probably going to make somebody angry or alienate yourself, because you're not taking into account the person that you're desperate to play with. Part to whole. Multiple meanings of words. So this is where idioms come into play. This is where students who use colloquialisms or slang or even texting, you know, the social skills application can also be in text or online social media. So if you don't understand, you know, catch you later, or, I mean, I'm blanking on some right now, but I'm sure you can come up with a number of things that I don't even know a lot of them. As a, you know, somewhat middle-aged woman with small children, I don't follow some of my middle school, adolescent, teens conversation volleys back and forth, because I really don't know what they're talking about sometimes. And so I don't have autism. Imagine somebody with a language delay. They're even more clueless than I am. So prediction. If I can't predict how me pushing this person off the swing is probably going to go for that person, I can't then make quality decisions proactively rather than reactively. Problem solving, nonverbal cues. So because I'm an elementary education teacher as well as a behavior analyst, I was fascinated in doing this work with my colleagues and our speech friends as far as how pragmatic language it manifests itself in academic skill deficits. So vocabulary, anytime you're working on vocabulary words, that is multiple meanings of words. If you've ever tried to teach a kid to Google a word and they look up Wikipedia and there's multiple ideations of the same word depending on the parts of speech with which you're using that word, that is mind-blowing to a person who does not have the underlying component skill of multiple meanings of words. reading comprehension, written language. This one is I'm going to get to the next level of my soapbox. I'm standing on the Eiffel Tower right now and I'm yelling to everybody below, stop buying the reading comprehension books at your local teacher store and think just doing more reading comprehension activities is going to fix a kid with autism's reading comprehension problems. It's doing the same thing over and over and expecting a different result. It's the definition of insanity. Stop asking the kid to do reading comprehension like behaviors if they don't have at least these component language skills: predicting, sequencing, perspective taking, part to whole. Main idea, supporting details in written language. If you want somebody to write a cohesive paragraph with a topic sentence, supporting details, and a closing sentence, they cannot do that if they can't do puzzles. If they can't look at a puzzle and look at the parts of that picture and put those puzzle pieces together, they cannot do main idea, supporting details unless you heavily work on part to whole component training. Analytical thinking. This is where you get into, from 3rd to 4th grade, you're no longer learning to read, you're reading to learn. And that requires some analytical thinking. In higher level novel studies, language arts programs, higher level math programs, I had a student in our middle school that is gifted in math and has off the charts been labeled gifted on all assessments from preschool all the way up until 6th grade in math. However, as soon as he got into algebra, geometry, and calculus, he lost his mind because he did not understand how the alphabet had anything to do with math. So when he saw the first time he had to do an algebraic equation that had letters in there instead of numbers, he could not figure it out because math was so easy to him. He could just see the answers, but now actually having to do a proof and prove the answers, he couldn't do it because he didn't have part to whole, he didn't have sequencing, and his problem solving skills were lacking. This talk a lot problem solving, if anybody wants to get in touch with me, I'll give you, I should actually put this on this presentation. I'll give you a link. A colleague of mine in another private school who is also a behavior analyst is kind of a leader in our country in creating a problem solving curriculum called Talk a Lot Problem Solving. They call it TAPS. And she actually sells a curricular sequence for teachers, which basically lays out how do you teach kids how to problem solve? How do you show your work? How do you explain your work? So if we have kids who can't even identify how they're doing an activity while they're doing the activity, they are not going to be able to explain their work on a math test. So shoot me an email and I'll give you a link for that. So I believe I've exhausted most of my time. I have an email address here. I have no problem with anybody emailing me. Hundreds, thousands, however many people want to email me. If you have questions that I can answer, I'd be happy to. I can shoot you different resources. As long as you are patient with my response, I promise I'll get back to you. I'm pretty good with email. So if anything I said here today either sparked a question or you'd like further resources on anything I've mentioned today, I have no problem. Please don't hesitate to email me.
Oh, wow, Allie, that was just super. Thank you so much for that incredible content. I think sometimes when we think about academics, we think about them just like, oh, we're teaching reading and writing, and just kind of filling in all those component skills related to academic success is imperative if we really want those kids to be academically successful.
And they can be if you fill in those component holes, at least make progress in them, whether they're completely filled in or not. I can get most kids with autism up to functional literacy in this country, which is about 4th, 5th grade reading. I can do that for most kids if I'm working on those underlying language skills.
That's fantastic. There's a couple of questions here that we can just close out this with, and I'd love to hear your perspective. So one of them early on, when you're talking about the big 6 plus 6, we had a high school teacher to just ask the question, what are some ideas for teaching those kind of those 6 plus 6 for secondary students? What are some activities that you might do to address those? Well, probably in a more functional way, I bet, is where that question is coming from.
Yeah, so I actually, and I should also put this on the slides, I have a teacher's guide with included IEP goals and objectives that explains further some of those big 6 plus 6 activities. And in that teacher's guide, it lists a number of self-help skills or independent living skills available to that. the easiest thing you could do is just set up workstations that require an individual skill. So it doesn't have to be anything spectacular, to be honest. It could just be, hey, somebody's class job today is picking up all the pencils, and you get, I don't know, credit or points or whatever your incentive system is. Or the student can just leave for the day is probably the incentive system, that if you pick up those pencils with a pinch in the right place on the pencil, you're just going to pinch the pencil, pick it up and put it in this box in the right way. So have a box skinny enough that they can't just drop it in there. That's a great way to work on pinch and pick up together. You can do, let me think, shaking and squeezing. There's many, I mean, I use dog toys a lot, and I know that's probably not very politically correct, but the interesting thing about dog toys is that dog toys are designed for the jaw strength of either a puppy or an older dog. So you can find various, I guess, plastic strengths across various hand strengths of your students. So a lot of OTs will give me, you know, like hand strengthener apparatus, if that's the plural of apparatus. So, you know, the squeezy balls, but a lot of those are actually too hard a plastic for my student to interact with. So I'll get dog toys and I'll make a game out of, you know, let's count the number of squeaks I can hear in a minute time, and your goal today is to get one more squeak than the next one. So there's a lot of gameplay you can do around this, and I'd be happy to send that teacher's manual out and then answer any follow-up questions and give more ideas if it's a specific classroom setting, because I need to know, you know, if you're in a math class trying to work on tool skills, you probably don't want a dog toy squeaking in the background incessantly.
Probably not. Probably
Yeah.
not. And that actually that feeds into the last question that we'll cover, which I think is really really poignant. And as you're talking about IEP goals and objectives, and the question is, when you're writing IEP goals and objectives, do you write them for component or composite skills? Like, how do you frame that? Is it both? Is it, you know, how do you, if you're thinking about it in this framework? Because sometimes people say, you know, I want my child to be, you know, writing. Like, how do you frame that in your documentation?
Yeah, I mean, and it's tricky because it really does depend on the level of the student, the level of the disability, so how significantly behind they are. But usually the annual goal is some form of a composite skill, and then the individual components are the objectives underneath that goal, within reason. So if the annual goal has to be a common core math skill, you know, let's just say one of the numerical operations goals for kindergarten is, you know, addition up to single digits and nines, up to 0 through 9 using addition. I would then consider that common core goal my goal for the IEP, and then the objectives underneath are any version of those component skills that I outlined, but I would do an assessment first to see which ones are not mastered. So an early assessment or a criterion reference assessment is key and pinpoint to see what skills are there, what component skills are there, and then those component skills can be added into a further composite skill in your goal. But obviously, you know, some of our kids, if they're 10, 11, 12 and significantly behind their peers, there's not enough paper on the planet for the component composite analysis in a single IEP. So what you want to do is hit those major components that will give you the biggest bang for your buck in a composite, but it's typically the objective is the component and the composite is the goal.
Excellent. That was my, I have to share that I thought that would be what you would say, but I'm so glad to
Okay.
hear that.
Oh,
Which is
good.
just, which is super.
Reliability.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. So I just really want to close out by thanking you so much for your completion of this webinar. It was really just fabulous to be able to learn from you. We will be sending out a certificate of attendance to all the participants today to be able to document your learning. And we hold these webinars every month, and we encourage people to sign up and participate for this shared learning opportunity. Ali, again, thank you so much for your shared knowledge today.
You're welcome. It was my pleasure. Thanks, everyone.